It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Ze'ev Jabotinsky, the grandson of the legendary, the hero, not only in Zionistic Jewish history, but in all Jewish history, Ze'ev Jabotinsky. So Ze'ev, you're named after your iconic grandfather.
Yeah.
Can I ask, where were you born?
I was born in Haifa, here,
And in what year, if you don't mind me asking?
1953.
1953. And you grew up in a very, I'm sure from your father and the history of your parents, from a very Zionistic family.
Zionistic, yes, definitely.
And did your parents discuss a lot about your grandfather?
No, surprisingly, almost nothing. Because my father wanted me to grow in a liberal family, which would be as much as possible normal, so that I can make up my mind when I grow up. Me and my sister too. She's older than me, so that was the atmosphere at home. Unless I asked, we weren't really exposed, to these things until 1964. My father was sent in a mission of the Israeli Foreign Affairs Office to Ethiopia for 2 years, starting 1963, ending 1965, and in the middle, Levi Eshkol ordered the bringing my grandfather to burial in Israel. And this was an issue that made me realize for the first time that my grandfather was not really a usual person. And that happened, I was a kid then, 10-year-old kid, but when we had to go to the synagogue where the memorial service was given before the coffins of him and my grandmother were brought to Kennedy Airport and flown to Israel. There was a huge crowd in the streets, and we were in a hotel. So somebody brought us from the hotel. My mother and father went earlier, me and my sister, and the crowd was filling lots of streets because there was no room in the Central Synagogue in Manhattan. And there were loudspeakers in the streets, similar to what happened in Russia during the communism, when Jews weren't allowed to practice Judaism.
Yeah.
But on Rosh Hashanah they would crowd in the streets because there was no place in the synagogue. And then somebody took us in by force. He was a very masculine person, and he really opened the way so that we could enter into the synagogue and join our parents in the memorial service. That was the minute I understood, or these were the minutes I understood that my grandfather had been somebody special, because that was obvious. I mean, until then I had no idea.
Growing at school, when you were at school, with the name Ze'ev Jabotinsky, the
It was
teachers...
abandoned here in Israel. Because it was banned by the authorities here. This was Mapai's rule then, and this was almost Bolshevik in terms of what you teach, what you expose to the public, and what you do not. So until I graduated high school, he was pretty much banned from the education system in Israel. Today, those that preceded those who banned are really bearing his name on every occasion as an example of what should be done. But their ancestors weren't.
It's amazing.
And that's how it was.
But your teachers, they must have known who Jabotinsky were, who he was, or
I don't know
his
if they knew or
contribution?
not, but they definitely did not support it.
And your parents, your father and your mother, did they not speak at home about
I told you, no.
stories or?
Not really, unless we asked, okay? And sometimes we did ask, but this was occasional. I mean, it was not a template of life or anything.
So a lot of the information that you gained, was it from your own reading and your own?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, my father died when I started to get interested in this. And this was when I was 16 years old. So I lost the source of knowledge. So I had to go back to the books and to interview people who knew both my father and my grandfather. And I went to many people and asked them many questions about them. And so that's the way I know about them.
And uncles and aunts or other relatives that?
There aren't any. My father was an only son, and my mother was an only daughter.
Wow.
So.
And he passed away in 1940.
Ze'ev Jabotinsky.
Ze'ev Jabotinsky.
In 1940, in Beitar camp in Hunter, New York.
Right.
At those days, there were summer camps. Hunter had dozens of them. One of them had been a Beitar camp. He came to visit. Actually, the reason he was in the United States at that stage had been because he wanted to try to perform the same thing he did on the First World War. This was during Second World War. In the First World War, he succeeded in persuading the British government. At that time, Britain had been the most powerful power in the world, to form Jewish legions to participate in World War I's effort to free Palestine. This was almost inconceivable, but he did manage to do it, and he was one of the soldiers who volunteered, of course, to participate in it, and the British gave him an officer rank without officer course.
Wow.
There were about 6 people during the history of British armed forces who gained this honor. So he wanted, when World War II broke at the end of 1939, he moved from Europe from London or Paris to the United States in order to try to do the same with the American government. But he died at the beginning of the process, so he couldn't do it.
That was the Jewish army that Hillel Kook was trying to set up?
That's right.
Oh, so that was your grandfather's plan, and Hillel Kook was trying to organize it?
Hillel Kook tried to do that. I don't know if it was exactly the same thing, but Hillel Kook came into activity from a totally different reason. Hillel Kook came to the United States with his American wife, Betty, to live in New York, and he had been a successful businessman. One day he rode in the subway, and he opened the New York Times, and on page 17, he told me, at the bottom part of the page, there was a very small cubicle in which it said that the one sub minister in the Department of State just had a meeting with Rabbi Wise. Rabbi Wise was the leader of the Jewish community in the United States at that time, and this was in '42, in which he really briefed him about the extermination of Jews by the Germans in Europe. That's it. A very small thing. At page 17, nobody reads it. So he got home. He took a clean shirt, and clean clothes. He told his wife he will come whenever he comes back. Took a night train to Washington, D.C., and he went directly to the State Department, and he came to this sub-minister's office and asked the secretary to meet with him. She said, "Sir, do you have an appointment with him?" He said, "No, I don't have an appointment, but I must see him." She said, "If you don't have an appointment, I can't get you in." He said, "Listen, I will sit in your office until you get me in, so try to pencil me in." And so when she realized this guy was serious, she let him in, and he came in and said, I don't remember the name of the sub-minister, but he said to him, "Listen, I really apologize, I barged into your office that way, but I read this thing." He showed him on the newspaper, the news, and I wanted to verify with you if that is true. He said, "Yes, that's true, and this was not the first time I briefed Rabbi Weiss. This was about the third time I briefed him." So he said, then why didn't Rabbi Weiss do anything? He said, "You're at my office. You should ask him. He's not here. I can't give you the answer. I briefed the Jewish community as leader about that, and he preferred to keep it a secret, to keep it quiet, not to make an issue out of it." So Hillel turned to him, thanked him for getting him to meet with him, and said to him, "You are looking at one Jew whose life had changed this minute, and would never be quiet until this is not publicized and something is done about it." And he left the office. This is why Hillel Cook went into the
Executive committee.
activity and started to form the committees. Okay, one of the committees was the committee for Jewish Army, but I think this was one of the last ones.
I heard it otherwise, that the Jewish army was first.
Maybe.
Jabotinsky sent him there to set it up from the Irgun. And then, I don't know if your father joined him or Sam Marin at the time. And then when he read this announcement, he put Zionism and everything aside. And he said on video, "I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm going to wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night with only one purpose, to try to save the Jews of Europe."
And they succeeded to do, in a very small scale, but they succeeded to save tens of thousands of
Maybe
Jews.
more, according to the Weimar Institute, 200,000, but you never know what these numbers.
The numbers are, okay, so
Numbers
I
are
was-
numbers.
And you heard this from Hillel Cook himself?
Yes, because Hillel Cook was my father's best friend, and he made Aliyah to Israel in 1966, and they met a lot. My father died 3 years later in 1969, and I really adopted him as my stepfather. And I had long sessions with him, asking him the questions, getting all kinds of.
Ze'ev, can I ask, did Hillel Cook approach Stephen Weiss after he had been at the sub-minister?
I don't know. What I know is that Stephen Weiss sent, when they started activity about trying to avoid, to put pressure on the American establishment to try to avoid extermination of the Jews in Europe, they were banned by the whole establishment of Stephen Weiss, to the extent that they sent a delegate to my father's mother, the widow of Jabotinsky, telling her that her son, who was in that group of Hillel Cook, are sabotaging the Jewish community's life and so on.
Stephen Weiss said that?
They sent Ben Hecht there. But Ben Hecht, when he came there, he got convinced that they were right and Stephen Weiss was wrong. So
Our author Ben Hecht was the author of Perfidy and
Yeah.
He was very involved in the arts and
So they sent Ben Hecht to Palestine?
No, they sent. No, she was in New York.
Oh, she was in New York.
Yes, yes.
Oh, your grandmother stayed in New York
Yes,
after Hunter Mountain.
He was buried in New York, my grandfather, and she didn't want to leave the place where he was
I
buried
see.
because she wanted to get buried next to him,
I see.
which she did.
So she stayed in New York.
And even when he was brought to burial in Mount Herzl, she was brought with him, and they are both buried in Mount Herzl.
Now, there's one thing which I heard differently. It's important maybe to cross-check. I heard that what happened is that Riegner from the World Jewish Congress sent a telegram from Switzerland advising either the State Department or the World Jewish Congress about the atrocities. It was followed a short time later, maybe 1 or 2 months later, by the Sternbuch cable, were Orthodox. And then Weiss consulted, or ran right away to the State Department, and the State Department told him, advised him to hush it up, and then he hushed it up.
That may have been true.
But he went there, I heard that he went there voluntarily. Okay,
It may be
maybe
true.
true. Maybe true.
Maybe true. I'm not.
No, well, it sounds like from what the State Department said that we told him, but he's the one who didn't make it public. It's not really clear what. But he said he's the one who didn't make it
That
public.
was what Hillel Kook was answered when he asked why doesn't
really?
he do it.
I heard is that the State Department requested him not to, but I wouldn't care what the State Department says with the involved Jews.
He betrayed his
He's a big fan of Roosevelt and of the government.
It doesn't matter.
there were
doesn't matter.
many incidents when the rabbis marched on to meet with Roosevelt, and they were prohibited from meeting him. When they had the march in Washington,
Did he tell you about it, the Rabbi's March?
No.
No. Okay.
there was a march of Orthodox rabbis, and it's interesting that it was mainly
Before Yom
Orthodox.
Kippur, there was a march of rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, many of them hardly spoke English still, and they wanted to meet with Roosevelt. And Roosevelt's Jewish advisor, or Rosenstein or something like that, said to Roosevelt apparently, these are not the kind of Jews that you want to meet with. And then Roosevelt was spirited out of the White House. But the Speaker of the Congress, I think, came down, and the rabbis handed to him a plea to save our brothers and sisters. That's what happened. But it's interesting that only, father didn't speak about this.
No.
The rabbi, that's an important thing.
No.
Because one question is, and I guess you don't know if his father didn't speak, why didn't the conservative and the reform theological leaders join the Orthodox?
with them.
Maybe the Orthodox didn't want to be seen with them, or the conservatives and the reform listened to Weiss. They didn't want to make any noise. But you don't know.
I have no idea.
You don't know. Okay.
Ze'ev, can I ask you, looking back, I mean, the most amazing work that Hillel Kook did, and his personal sacrifice, and his enthusiasm, and what he achieved. And here in Israel, unfortunately, he's not known as a great hero amongst the masses. He's not taught Hillel Kook. It must upset you. Having known him personally,
Look, the thing is as follows.
he doesn't have the recognition that he should have.
Because he didn't continue to be in public life after that.
No, it's not the only reason.
He was for a very short while a Knesset member. Actually, he was not elected to the Knesset.
No?
He was
How did he
elected.
get there?
No.
How did he get in
Don't
there?
you know that? The Israeli first Knesset was never elected.
Right, I know. I heard about the putsch.
Okay. What happened? What was elected is the how do you call it?
Congressional, constitutional committee.
Constitutional
something
committee.
like that. Something like that.
The
Constitutional Congress. I think.
What?
Constitutional Congress. I think.
Constitutional Congress was elected in February 1949. Okay, they had to form a constitution.
But there was a purpose to form a constitution, really?
Yes.
But there was
And
a
that is even written in Megillat HaAtzmaut, in the
Declaration of
Declaration of
Independence.
Independence. Yeah. So, but and they were elected for this purpose, and their second or third decision had been to turn themselves into the first Knesset. So this was,
After the constitution.
there was no
Oh,
constitution.
no. So they decided to forget about the constitution.
Yes, and
then
to elect themselves.
we are now the first Knesset.
We are now, yeah. And these are the 5 words in Hebrew that turned everything off. המועצה המכוננת היא הכנסת הראשונה. The Constitution Committee is the first Knesset. And that is, there's a long-term and short-term problem with it. Okay? The short-term problem is that they really took power, that 118 Knesset members voted
to elect themselves.
to elect themselves and the two that opposed, Hillel Cook and my father, to become the first Knesset members. Okay? This is completely illegal. Okay? So that's a very
Short-term, right?
short-term damage. The long-term damage is that we don't have a constitution until
That's
today,
right,
and all
yeah.
the disputes, the harsh disputes, are getting harsher because the gaps get wider.
Right.
And there's no constitution, it's true.
That's right.
You think it would have? Did your father say it would have been easier to establish Israel from almost nothing if there was a constitution? It would have been created a problem.
I don't know about my father. I heard it from Hillel. So,
I heard it from Hillel.
So Hillel said,
No, I know he was adamant. But I think he jumped up and said it's a putsch or something.
yeah,
like
he
that.
said it's a putsch.
Right.
And the other people of Mapai who sat in front of him said, "Shh, you don't understand anything."
Brought him to. Who's the one who said? Who is the one who announced that it's the first case? Was it Sharet or Ben Gurion? Do you know?
118 Knesset members.
No, but somebody
who
said
voted.
something in the beginning.
This was,
Who put up the motion?
The motion was put by Sprintzak,
Sprintzak.
who was the Knesset chief,
Right.
speaker, the speaker
right.
of the Knesset.
Oh. So that's when Hillel could jump in.
That's right.
And then there were parties already? The
Yes,
Herut,
yes,
Herut
yes.
and everything existed
Yes, yes.
before that?
Yes,
Even in the Yeshu?
yes, yes. Before the elections, all the parties formed.
No, after the independence, right?
Yeah, the independence had been in 48,
Right.
in May 48.
And the right-of-way parties were formed.
And immediately there was a war that broke out.
Right.
So they couldn't form the elections, but they took one ceasefire that took place at the beginning of 49
Yeah.
and made the elections then.
Oh, so that was a popular election for the parties?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. So your father was in the Herut, right?
Yes, sir. That's right.
And
No,
can I ask, did Menachem Begin, did he come over to your home, or was your father
No.
very close with him?
No.
Probably the opposite.
Were they friends? Were they...
No.
That's what I heard. Tell me, why was two questions. Why was the relationship between Hillel Cook and Begin so acrimonious? And was your father involved in it also?
My father had another layer.
Okay.
Okay, and that was that he was the son of Jabotinsky
Oh,
and
that's
not
even
Begin.
worse. Right. I see. Why would Begin be against Jabotinsky? Jealousy. That he cannot feel it. Why was the relationship so bad with Begin and Hillel Cook? Do you know?
Because they opposed him. They were in opposition in Herut.
I see. Was there opposition within the party?
Yeah.
But these pictures with Menachem Begin and a very big picture of Jabotinsky in the background with
Yes.
in the Herut party.
That's true. So,
It's hard to believe that they weren't close. It's,
No, but that was Jabotinsky, the
this
grandfather.
was my grandfather,
I know
not
your
my
father.
father.
Not his father. I see. Why did they leave the Knesset?
Because the Knesset,
Well, they sat there for a while, right? For 1 or 2 years, no?
yes, for 2 years.
2 years.
At the end, they split into a small party called the New Regime, Hamishtar HaChadash,
Right.
which advocated for free economy, for a lot of things
Right.
which sound very logical today, but at that time were not.
Radical.
Radical. So and they went. They tried to be re-elected to the second Knesset, but they failed.
Was Merlin also with them?
Yes, there were 4 Knesset members with them: Merlin, Hillel Cook, my father, and Cohen Sidon. I think Cohen Sidon was the advocate who found Yossele Schuchmacher later. You know, the guy that was kidnapped by
the boy.
The boy, yeah.
It's very famous. Infamous story, you know.
Yeah. So he was the fourth one. I
And
think.
why did they leave the Knesset after they formed their own party?
They didn't leave.
They were voting.
The Knesset
They didn't-
dispersed, and then there were new elections.
And
and
you
they-
actually didn't make it.
and they
And then
didn't
Hillel
make
Cook
it.
went back to America at that time,
Then
right away.
Probably his wife said, "Enough is enough.
Oh, I see.
We're going back home." So
to Manhattan, right?
and they lived in Manhattan, and he made a lot of money, and he
What was
lived
it?
there.
He was a broker?
A broker in
Wall Street?
Wall Street.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ze'ev, can I ask, it's a bit of a controversial question. The whole affair with the Altalena,
Yeah.
was that your father's involvement or...
No, my father hadn't been then in Israel. He was in New York because the British, when his father died in 1940, he was in prison for bringing in illegal immigrants.
The
He was-
British imprisoned him.
Yes, and that was at the beginning of 1940. That they imprisoned him in August when my grandfather died. They released him and let him go to America for the funeral and canceled his visa to Israel. So he was 8 years in New York, and that's when he joined the group of Hillel Cook.
Did Hillel Cook discuss his involvement with Altalena with you ever?
Yes, he told me the story how he saw it.
How did you see it?
Hillel Cook went to Kfar Vitkin's beach when the Altalena got there, and there was the whole thing.
They unloaded ammunition there, right?
They wanted to unload.
But they didn't unload at Kfar Vitkin?
What?
They didn't unload anything in Kfar Vitkin.
They tried, and then the Haganah started shooting, so they stopped.
But they started shooting already in Kfar Vitkin?
Yes,
Oh,
yes. So on the beach, Hillel says he shouted at Menachem Begin, give the weapon and the ship to the Haganah. Give it. It's our state. And Begin wouldn't listen. So Begin mounted the ship. Okay, he went on board, and the ship went sailed back to the sea, and the
Came to
rest
Tel
is
Aviv
known.
after that. Didn't Hillel Cook...
And he told me afterwards when he stayed in Kfar Vitkin, he went up north. He wanted to get back to Tel Aviv, so he didn't know how to do it. So he started walking parallel to the beach until he hit Nachal Alexander. It's not a river. It's not
Small
even a
river.
creek.
River Israeli style.
So he started walking. He didn't know how to swim, so he started walking along one bank of that creek until he reached the beach, and then he found out that it wasn't streaming at all because the beach blocked that creek from getting into the sea. So he walked back, and went to and stopped a taxi to Tel Aviv, and there was a roadblock of Haganah of IDF people, and they asked for identities, and they saw his name was Hillel Cook, so they asked him, "How are you related to Peter Bergson?"
Wow.
So he said, "I'm Peter Bergson." So
That
they
was
took
his
him
first
off.
mistake.
They took him off the taxi. Later on, he understood that there was a death penalty on his head from Ben Gurion personally, but he was taken to Bet Sha'an's prison, and he was sitting there for 3 months until they got him out.
I heard from Nili Cook, his widow, that in the prison he was afraid to go to the bathroom because he thought that they might say that he's trying to escape and would shoot him in the back. But that somebody saved him. It was in the Secret Service then. It was a friend of his, and he
I don't know
saved him.
that. Okay, I don't know that part.
So the prison episode you don't know. Oh.
No.
But he said that there was a death sentence on him.
He told me later on he found out that there was a death sentence on his head.
On him only, or maybe others?
On his head.
On his head, for sure.
Yes.
But you also others, or
I don't know.
You don't know. Now, what I heard is time to cross-check stories. Somebody in New York told me that Hillel Kook is the one who organized the ship, and he wanted to turn it
He
over
bought-
originally to the Haganah.
Yeah, he wanted to give it to the government of Israel.
He was already abroad when he organized
I don't know the detail, but
But on
on
for sure.
Kvarvitkin, he quarreled with Begin, and Begin wouldn't listen.
I see. I see.
That's unbelievable.
So that's a story.
Sure, that's amazing. And you heard it firsthand.
Yes.
But your father was not involved.
No, he was in New York.
He was in New York, right? Now tell me, was your father? I heard about Hillel Kook's manifesto about the Hebrew nations. He probably talked to you about that.
Yeah.
How did your father feel about that?
I think the manifesto came after my father died. I'm not sure about the dates. Maybe they drafted it together. I'm
But
not
philosophy maybe was brewing even before that, no?
sure. Probably, but the manifesto had no impact at all in Israel.
No, I don't know. It has. Well, it depends what it means. Impact. First of all, he wrote it. See, I am a great admirer of what Hillel Kook has done during the Shoah. I don't agree with his manifesto. It's just another story. It says about limited right of return, only right of return of Jews up to a certain period. We are one nation together with the Arabs, which is positive and negative things. But your father didn't talk about that, right? Yossi Agassi is a very big chassid of Hillel Kook in this aspect.
Yeah, he knows, and he talked to him much more than I did.
And he's also older.
He was there for hours and hours,
Oh,
days
yes.
and days.
Oh, but your father didn't talk because that's very important.
Okay, I'd like to ask you, Ze'ev, if possible, with regard to your grandfather, there's legendary stories that he would go to many of the shuls in Europe, and he was locked out of some of the shuls, that the rabbis wouldn't want him to, not all, but there were certain
Sorry. Okay.
certain communities, they didn't want him to speak to the community, but he had like a nevuah. He had the insight to say that you must leave Europe, your grandfather, and
I'll tell you what happened. My grandfather, in 1928, has lived in Tel Aviv, okay? And he wanted to live in Tel Aviv. There's a lot of evidence that he wanted his son to study in the Reali school in Haifa, and he's registered to buy land in Haifa for him and for his sister. So he wanted to live here. In 1928, there was a committee, fact-finding committee, that came to Palestine in order to interview people about the rights of the Jews to immigrate before they published the White Book. So they wanted to invite him too, to give evidence here. And then people from Mapai, the opposition, came to them and said, how can you invite him? He was indicted in 1920 and set in prison because he organized illegal defense of Jews by illegal arms, and that's why he was imprisoned. They omitted the small detail that 8 months later he was acquitted totally. Okay, so the committee struck him out from the people who gave evidence. When they found out that he's not going to be invited, they came to the committee and they told them, listen, but he was acquitted too. That was 8 months later, but he's not to blame. He's a decorated British Army officer. So they said, okay, that was a mistake of us not to check, and we invite him to give the evidence in London. So because our schedule is closed here in Palestine, and we're leaving at a certain date, so please, at the beginning of 1929, come to London and give us the evidence, which he did. He knew that when he will leave Palestine, they will cancel his return visa. At that time, he already forecasted the extermination of the Jews of Europe. Why am I telling you this? Because there is an evidence of a public speech he made a club similar to Rotaries that was in Tel Aviv, in which he lined up the history that he foresees for the next future. It was called Club 28. This was the year, so he gave a forecast of 28 years. It is chillingly exact.
Like a nevuah, like a prophecy.
Like a prophecy. And he said there that the first 4 or 5 years will be very hard economically, but then at the end there will be a prosperity which will also show capitalism's ugly face of people trying to make money on the expense of others, and so on and so forth, which was exact. And he said the next period will from 32, so he missed by a year, until 1940 will be a dark age of the Jews. Dark clouds will come over the Jews of Europe. These are his words, and the danger will become more and more apparent to them, and unfortunately they will not try to leave. He said from 40 to 48, catastrophe will fall on the Jews that stayed in Europe. Many of them, many millions of them will die.
He foresaw.
Yes, and he said in 48, the Jewish state will be formed, and the gates of Aliyah will be opened by the bare fists of the survivors who will knock on the locked gates.
How do you,
Okay.
how do you
So
explain
that's-
that?
What?
How do you explain this, the prophecy?
I don't explain it. I'm just stating.
Religious people say Ruach HaKodesh or something like that.
Okay, but so he foresaw it already in 28, at the end of 28. After he was deported from Palestine, meaning the visa was cancelled, and he finished with the evidence he gave, which made a difference in the results, he started to move from one shtetl to the other in Europe. He moved to live in train cars. Okay, he wasn't living in a home. He moved from one place to the other. Each night he gave a lecture, trying to convince the Jews to abandon everything and flee from Europe. There's a lot of evidence written about it. Now, Mapai was against it. So they were sending their people to come 3 days after he made a speech, say in the cinema of a certain village or a town hall or wherever, or in a synagogue. They would come and make a rally at the same place. That was the issue, and that was, the excuse was to make it about things that concern Palestine, socialism, etc. But the real reason was at the beginning. They would say, we heard when we came here that Jabotinsky had been here 3 days ago. Is that true? They knew it was true, but they would ask, and they'd say, yes, he had a lovely, wonderful speech. And they would say he probably predicted that you're about to be murdered. He panicked. Don't worry, he is panicking. And there is nowhere to go to Palestine. We come from Palestine. If all of you will immigrate, there will be no work, and there will be no food, and there will be. You should go on with your life. This is just a panic of somebody who should be institutionalized. Okay, and they were sabotaging it all the way. So probably your question about the rabbis was part of it, and maybe not. Maybe the rabbis just opposed it because he was Zionist, and Zionism was against the
At that time.
the
But
Orthodox
not
religion.
all. It wasn't.
It was
all of it.
much of it. I don't know.
All of it.
What was in it for the other Zionists? Why would they do this?
Mapai,
Mapai, in those days.
they had a majority here, But they had no majority if all the Jews would come from Eastern Europe.
They could have, some of them would have joined Mapai, some of them would have joined something else.
That's the problem. There's something else is the problem.
I see. Oh, they had total. Oh, didn't have total monopoly. Total monopoly.
Yes, they were very.
Also because of the monopoly.
Yeah, they wanted to maintain political monopoly on what goes on here.
You told me this on the telephone. Once.
See, there's a story that your grandfather met with Reb Meir Shapiro from Chachmei Lublin, and he saw the beautiful yeshiva that was built in Lublin, and he said the famous words that it's wonderful, but it's not in Eretz Israel, and it won't last.
I didn't tell you that.
No, but it's a story that we've heard. We've heard from many people.
Maybe, okay.
And he had also the nevuah that, and it's true,
Look, he
because
has a
that
chilling, very small speech he made in the synagogue of Warsaw on Yom Kippur of 1939 or 38. I'm not sure. Okay, maybe a year before before World War II started, or a few months before that. And in this short speech, he says, "Flee while you can. Go away, because the fire is, the catastrophe is close, and when it will start, it will spit fire and kill all of you."
Where was this published?
It's everywhere.
this
I'll
was
send it to
in
you.
Warsaw,
In Warsaw's synagogue, main synagogue.
Was there Shabbos published?
Nobody. Now, that's the reason why he formed Beitar. Because he understood from this day-to-day touch with the Jewish communities and the Jewish public, that the people who are not youth anymore, above youth, older than youth, don't want to leave there. They think that nothing will happen. They see the anti-Semitism as something that's ongoing, something you have to live with, and they won't leave because of parnosa.
Yeah, they're living, to make a living.
To make a living. So he understood that the only ones that will leave, the only ones that will be convinced and leave are the youth. So he formed a youth movement for that, Beitar. That's how Beitar came into being.
And what year did he form Beitar?
32 or 35, I'm not sure. Okay. I think in Vilna.
So, what did your father say about Jewish leadership and his experience in the United States? And how to
My father, I never heard him talk.
Only Hillel Kook was in touch with them?
Yes.
He never said how it would have been if Stephen Weiss would have acted differently or not. We didn't speak.
I never heard from him anything
That's
about
an
it.
important issue.
Yeah.
What was your father's role in the Bergson group? Do you know?
I know that they sent him to Istanbul to be the representative in touch, their liaison to the Board of Refugees headquarters.
Oh, the Vatat
Yeah, the Vadat Salah. He was member of Vadat Salah.
he was from the Bergson group in Quote. He was the representative
That's
in
right,
Istanbul.
in Istanbul.
I see.
There's a testimony about it from Yoel Brandt in the Kastner
The
trial.
trial.
In the trial.
His son was here, by the way, your brother. Danny Brand was here.
Really?
He was here today, yeah.
So he testified that he came to Istanbul because Adolf Hitler sent him.
Eichmann sent him.
I'm sorry. Because Eichmann sent him for the trucks for Jews.
Trucks for lives.
Trucks for Jews.
Just for
That
blood
was-
or for Jews.
Yeah, and that was the deal. He wanted to strike, and he met first the revisionists representatives there, Klarman and my father, and then he met Teddy Kolek and Ehud Avriel.
They were also in Istanbul?
Istanbul, yeah, from Mapai's side.
From Mapai's side, right?
And my father told him not. He testifies that my father and Klarman told him not to go with
They are the ones who
Avriel.
warned him? Really?
not to go with Avriel because he will turn him
Over.
to the British,
Right.
over to the British. And he told him, if you come with us, we'll take you to the United States and put you in Madison Square Garden, where you will shout your things and everything will be publicized.
Right.
So my father was there on that mission. That was part
was
of his.
part of his mission.
But I don't know exactly what he did
In addition.
In the Berks.
Was he involved in with lobbying in Washington?
Probably. Yeah.
In the pageant or the newspaper ads and stuff like that. Did you speak about Hecht, your father?
No.
No. Did you speak about the Hebrew embassy in Washington?
Hillel told me about it, not my father.
What year was it established? Do you know?
What?
What year was the
The
Hebrew
embassy?
embassy set up in Washington?
I don't know the year, but they made it a long time before the state
Sure,
of Israel
sure,
was.
sure.
Now the Palestinians did
Had the same
copy
idea.
the same idea. No, they didn't have the idea.
No, they copied
They
it.
got it from you.
Right.
They imitated it.
Reverse engineered it. Right.
Yeah.
Do you know what the flag was there on the embassy? Was
Yes,
it
the
our
Israeli
flag,
flag.
the same flag that
Same
we have
flag
now?
that we have today.
When did we have that flag? When was that flag invented? Do you know?
Very early in the.
Well before the
Yes,
state?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And they had the same flag, exactly the
Yes.
same.
State of Israel just adopted it.
Did your father and your grandfather know Vahaftig? Zorach Vahaftig? Did they ever speak
Probably
about
they knew him from the first Knesset.
Because he had the nevuah to tell the people that you have to leave. He went to the rabbis and he said you have to leave. And he was very instrumental in getting the Rosh Hashiva of Mir to leave. He
But
listened to him.
I don't know about any connection.
Somebody told me to the number of Palestinians in the group, right? People, Jews from Palestine in those days. And somebody told me, because many of them, or maybe all of them, were members of the Irgun, that it worked smoothly because Hillel Cook was the leading commander, and it was kind of a military discipline, that you couldn't have typical Jewish arguments, but you had to do what the commander did. That's one of the reasons why they could
Hillel
function
Cook
amongst the Israelis, the Palestinians, not amongst the Americans, obviously.
Hillel Cook was the leader or the commander of the Etzel in the exile,
Internationally, really?
internationally.
Uh-huh.
And he is the one who nominated Menachem Begin
That's what I heard
to
also.
be the head of the Irgun when Begin came from Poland. And he told me it was a mistake.
Right. So, no, I said it was the worst mistake I ever made.
Yeah, the worst mistake he ever made. I didn't want to get that harsh. But and I asked him why. Is it personal? He said no. It was the worst mistake I ever made because somebody who didn't know the Irgun at all from all its aspects, never had anything to do with the operations of the Irgun.
Experience.
He was Netziv Beitar he was the head of Beitar in the youth movement in Poland.
Right.
And then he was a private in the Anders army. He wasn't a soldier with much training. And then Meridor telegrammed Hillel, because Hillel was in fact, after David Raziel died, they consulted with him on everything of importance. Okay, so he said, Menachem Begin, they knew him from Europe, just arrived in Palestine, and there's a suggestion to put him as the head of the commander of Etzel.
But why him if not one of the...
And Hillel Cook
issue with-
approved it, and he said it was a mistake because he
didn't have the
he
qualifications.
Didn't have the qualifications.
Why didn't they pick somebody from the Yishuv who really knew the...
That's what
That's
Hillel
surprising,
said.
no?
I mean, I don't know why.
Surprising.
Maybe they didn't want to get conflicts
Or
inside,
between themselves?
Yeah,
Could there be...
themselves.
So it's better to have
They
an
took
outsider, right?
An outsider come and
Right. I see. Interesting.
So
It's
he
an
said
important
that's
story.
why he said it was the
I
worst
didn't know that's
mistake.
important that you said that. But later it became personal. Because I heard,
No,
you know,
there
Becky
was a-
said when you were there at the event that I organized in Jerusalem, Becky nearly edited a video from Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die, I think, by Larry Jarvik from New York. But he interviewed Hillel Cook. And then Becky said, when she made a speech, I said that there was a television show or something, Begin was there, and he didn't know the microphone was on. And somehow Hillel Cook's name came up, and he said, with Hillel Cook, we don't speak to Hillel Cook. So it
Yeah.
became personal after all.
It was personal.
But it didn't start out that way. It was more logical management issues. You know, it's really sad. These are
Can
very-
I just ask you,
Yeah, sure.
in 76, when Likud came to power, how was your feeling?
77.
77. How was your feelings?
I was very glad. I was in service at that time. I was an Israeli Air Force
Did you
pilot.
ever think that it would happen?
You're a pilot?
I'm a pilot. Yeah.
You're a pilot, no?
A helicopter pilot of Israeli Air Force.
Did you ever think that you'd see the day when the Herut, when Likud would come to power?
I didn't believe even before these elections that Herut will win. I mean, because I was born with Mapai, and they won every election. But these were elections that made the swing.
Tipped over.
It tipped over, yeah.
Right.
It was actually the rebellion of those who were suppressed by Mapai.
Really.
Yeah.
And they were the majority.
Who were oppressed by them?
A lot of the Sfardim.
The
a lot of-
Sfaradim
The Sfaradim
came
mostly?
from the Arab
Oh, that's why the
states,
Sfaradim are such supporters.
the Aliyah that was in the Ma'abarot, and they were the poorer portion of the society, and they had a lot of bitterness against it. They
Is
didn't.
that for ideological reasons? Is it because of bitterness?
I think much of it is because of bitterness and because of the arrogance in which Mapai clerks treated them.
Yeah, that's true.
Have you heard about the Chachachim of Shimon Peres?
Yeah,
And that's
part
where
of it.
Much later on, much later.
That's much later on.
Yeah, but still, it was still
That's
there.
remains of what
Right,
was
there's
going on
the
before
echo
that.
of what happened.
That's it.
Tell me something. Wallenberg had his 100th birthday, I think, in 2012. And the Knesset organized an event for him. Wallenberg is a brand name, very well known, deserves it, no doubt about it. So does Karl Lutz and others. And then I had to organize it. I suggested to invite Wallenberg's niece, who's a friend of mine. I met her when I met Agnes Hirschi. And then I suggested, why doesn't Yuli Edelstein, maybe it was Ruby Rivlin at the time, why don't they invite Hillel Cook and his family, just maybe either publicly in the Mliah or in his office, to put his arms around them, just say thank you for what your father has done. And they didn't do that. What could be the reason why? Even Yuli Edelstein,
I think they don't know.
what?
Ignorance. They don't know.
No, Ruby Rivlin knows. I spoke to him about this once.
So
Why would Ruby Rivlin?
I'm not to answer about it.
I know, but
don't know.
go to his office.
Yeah.
Like you said. But that's
I have no
surprising. Netanyahu. Was Netanyahu's father involved with Hillel Cook in New York?
Not really. Netanyahu's father came, according to Netanyahu, I didn't check it, to Bibi. He came with my grandfather to the States on the mission to try to get the Jewish army built in the as part of the American army.
Netanyahu's father? Or?
Yes,
Oh.
Ben Zion Netanyahu.
No.
So he was with him, but when my grandfather died, I don't know what he did, but he didn't join Hillel Cook's group.
Was he in New York at the same time as the Bergson group was active?
He was until my grandfather died. He was in New York with my grandfather.
And they were close?
I don't know.
So how do you explain it? Because why did I bring this up? Here is Bibi, okay? He's a very bright guy with all of his problems also. Nobody's perfect. But why wouldn't people in the Likud do something about the story of Hillel Cook and others? It's an important story for them, even for the party.
I cannot give you the answer.
Do you have any
You're asking the
guesses,
wrong
any
person.
push?
No.
No. You were on the list of the Likud right ones, weren't you?
I'm a member of the Likud party. I'm paying taxes every year.
Dues, I see.
But other than that, I was trying to get elected to the Knesset. I failed, and that was a one-time event, which I probably am not going to repeat.
But at least you tried. But does it make sense that the Likud, in Israel, after all these years, recognizes Hillary Cook's achievements and his problems. I think that some of the manifesto is problematic, but as a man, he did great things.
Of course.
He represents that party,
He
right?
was very, very...
He was a great hero. He was really
I
great.
met Elie Wiesel once, because in New York somebody arranged it, and not really nobody in the politics world, etc. But somebody arranged it to ask, what about the Jewish Wallenbergs, I call them, like Hillary Cook, Montello, and a couple of others. And we had a talk in his office. He accompanied me to the elevator on Madison Avenue. He's a Romanian gentleman, I guess. Then I asked him, what do you think about Hillary Cook? And this is what he said: Hillary Cook haya ish gadol.
It's true.
Okay. Hillary Cook saved his life, by the way, in New York.
Okay.
You know that, right?
No?
We didn't know. Okay. Elie Wiesel was gracious enough to stay this at Fordham University. He said that he was very poor in New York as a journalist for Idiot, etc. And he ended up in a hospital. And then Hillary Cook, I guess, they knew each other, became friends. And then Hillary Cook went with blank checks,
To the hospital.
signed, I think, and said, New York is not a good place to be without any money. And he came back to him again with the checks. And then Elie Wiesel said, well, we became friends, and he said as a joke, we probably wanted to get his money back. We stayed in touch. So they knew each other well.
I never talked about Elie Wiesel with Hillary Cook.
The Holocaust Museum. He was, I heard that when they set up the Holocaust Museum in Washington, he was put into Siberia, but some place where maybe 2% of the people go. And that's also unusual. That happened in America. It's an American story. It's not just Yad Vashem that distorts. I don't understand.
Yad Vashem also distorts history. And
No, not all. They're the main distorters. Maybe the others follow, because Yad Vashem calls itself now the World Holocaust Museum, Intergalactic Holocaust Museum, okay? Not the Israeli. And there's certainly collusion, there's no competition. There should be competition of ideas. Yad Vashem is a big distorter. Kastner is the big hero there. Okay? Kastner has a big thing like that with his photo around this height. Carl Lutz has one this long with the floor, like Balata, okay, 30 by 30 centimeters. But why the Holocaust Museum in Washington? Maybe because of the World Jewish Congress. Because
I don't know, it's all politics.
it must be all politics. And the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
Look, the best example of the politics in it is the last mission Misha Arens took upon himself
About
to
the
expose the Warsaw,
Right,
who were the fighters
Right.
in the against the Nazis in the Warsaw Mutiny. Okay.
He did the opening of the book in the Great Synagogue in Yerushalayim, which I videoed, Moshe Aarons. Flags over
Flags
Warsaw.
over
Yeah.
Warsaw, yeah.
And it's a story that's not, until then, very few people knew about it.
Nobody knew.
Nobody
Nobody
knew.
It was held as a state secret.
It was a state secret?
Almost. No, I mean.
But Kilo, okay.
Kilo.
It's
But,
amazing.
the people who knew about it never testified or
But I
said
heard the reason
anything,
is because
they were
they
from
fought so
Eyal.
hard, almost nobody survived. But from the other group, some people survived, and then plus the system was receptive to those stories.
Those that managed to flee from the battle.
No, but also the system was responsive to those to hear them. Obviously, they were
Because
their people.
They were their people.
They were their people. That's all.
The story is as follows: the biggest fighting Jewish organ against the Nazis, according to the general, the Nazi general who fought against them, who actually
In Warsaw.
in Warsaw. Misha Arens, his main source of information were
His diary?
the diaries of
The Nazis.
Stroop,
Okay.
okay, colonel or something like that. Stroop, who was ordered by Hitler personally to
Eliminate.
the mutiny. Okay, so the resistance there, and the main group who took Morozovskaya Square and the buildings surrounding it had, in order to aggravate the Nazis, they flied 2 flags on the highest building so that the whole of Warsaw outside the ghetto could see.
What flags?
The Polish flag,
What Polish flag?
in order to get the support of
That
the
to
public.
appeal to the Poles.
And yeah, of course, because the Poles were also suffering from the
resistance.
Nazis.
Right.
And our flag, the Kachol Lavan.
Oh, the Kachol Lavan, really?
Yeah,
also?
that's right.
אבל מי עשה את זה?
And the group that did it
the
was
Pavel,
the Etzel.
Frankel.
Pavel Frankel's group was called ATSI. ATSI is ארגון צבאי יהודי. It was
The Jewish,
a military organization, a Jewish military organization. This was formed by mainly by people from the Etzel, from the Irgun.
From Palestine?
That's right, because
How did they form it?
I'll tell
long
you,
distance?
because during the years before the war, the Irgun was sending his commanders and soldiers to train in Poland, and the Polish government gave them arms and training
When was this?
before the World War.
Oh, before the World War.
Yes, so so
So the ongoing contact.
they were trained. They had arms. They were bigger than Eyal. Okay, Eyal is the one that
right.
Anilevich.
Miloš, 18.
Yeah, and they made the main thing that made Hitler so aggravated in order to put it down, because flying those flags.
Oh, the flags was the irritation.
Yes.
That's what's called
Oh, really?
flames
Yes.
over Warsaw.
Oh, that's the reason.
And Stuck couldn't get it down for 4 days of real fighting with machine guns, and many Germans were killed there in Morozovskaya. Nobody from Eyal participated in it. It was all ATSI, okay? And the Germans actually managed to kill all ATSI's fighters except one woman, okay?
So there's almost nobody to tell.
There was nobody to tell, while Pavel Frankel was died there, and all of them. And Eyal had a few survivors that managed to avoid combat and flee through the sewage channels out of the ghetto, and they came to Palestine.
They were
and
heard.
They shut their mouth.
That's
Even
why-
at the Eichmann trial, when they were
Oh, this came up in the
interrogated,
Eichmann trial? Why? What does
the
Warsaw have to do
Ghetto
with it?
Warsaw
That was-
rebellion.
Oh, that was in the Eichmann trial also?
Yes.
So it was a
They
collective
testified, but they
Holocaust trial.
testified
basically.
only about Eyal.
Oh, really?
They never said a word.
But why not? Why wouldn't they?
Because the other, they wanted to get the limelight.
You know that at that time, Stalin, in order to change history,
Right.
would tear pages from
Not
the
tear, but
Russian.
more elegant. They photoshopped it.
Yeah, they photoshopped it in. They changed pictures.
There's a
and
famous
so on.
picture by the Dnieper with the Moscow River.
In the Soviet encyclopedia.
Right. They choose to change pages.
So that was the same mentality.
I think when Beria was killed, and they changed it to Bering Straits, expanded the Bering Straits page, and that covered it. Right.
You know, there's a saying, and it's true. It took
You
the
should probably move in
Germans.
5 minutes, otherwise
It
it'll-
took the Germans more time to. It was harder for them, and it took them longer to destroy the Warsaw Ghetto than to conquer the whole of Poland,
Yes,
which is unbelievable.
because they fought, they fought against very trained people who had training, who had arms.
But the limited arms. I mean, you can't compare
Really?
their arms to the German arms. Germans
They
have
were-
unlimited arms.
Of course,
In
and that's
comparison,
why-
in comparison.
in comparison, and that's why
They didn't succeed.
They
They
won
failed. Okay. You're right.
eventually, but
No, but also they knew that it's either it's death in any case,
mhm.
right? And it might as well die honorably.
That's right.
And try to save as many as we can. Right? There's no choice. The Embrera.
No.
You know what's maybe closing? It's a sad story. It's a sad story that we couldn't get along in the ghetto. I heard that we couldn't get along because the other group said, well, these are not socialists, they're capitalists, whatever they are.
Yeah, that
There was
was-
we couldn't get along in the United States, Stephen Wise, etc. And we're not allowed to learn by the Yad Vashems to say never again shall we do this to each other again. So
No, Yad
never
Vashem
again-
is totally political.
Right.
It's distorting history.
Right.
It's not bringing the Bergson group's
Contribution.
activities.
And the others also, not just the
And the others
And
too.
And Kastner is there, and they don't, maybe they could feel that some of them, Kastner is a great hero, but many people, he was a traitor. Okay, he's not there, it's not honest.
Very, very controversial.
You know what?
He was a hero to 388 people who he saved,
Right, his family and friends.
including Lapid.
Including Lapid. Well, Lapid had nothing to do with that. Lapid became
He
his
was-
friend, he was working with him, he was his mashaliach at the Uyker, the Hungarian newspaper.
No. Tommy Lapid
He
was on the train.
He was on the train?
Yeah, as a
You kidding?
child. Yes,
You
with his
kidding?
mother.
With his mother?
Because they knew Kastner.
But they knew Kastner.
Yes, and Kastner.
How
put
did they
them
knew
as
Kastner?
a-
They were from Yugoslavia or something, not even from Budapest.
I don't know. They knew him, and he put them on the
That
train.
I didn't know.
Yes.
No, and obviously he got there partially or large scale because of protection. You know, at that time, Lapid was the chairman of the advisory board of Yad Vashem.
One last word about Kastner. Also, I never talked about it with Hillel or my father. I found books in my father's library. And I read them. And I didn't know who to believe, okay, when I read it. Kastner or those that testified against him. Until I got to almost the end of the book,
Yeah.
where they say that Shmuel Tamir flew to Nuremberg
Yeah.
and looked in the archives and came back to the trial, and he said to Kastner, he put Kastner on the stand to interrogate him, and he told him, Mr. Kastner, you testified in the past that you never assisted any Nazi officer or any Nazi person after the World War ended. Do you stand behind those words? He said, yes, I never helped them. He said, so do you recognize the handwriting on this paper? He put it in front of him. He said, it's mine. Would you read it to the court? So, and Kastner read to the court. This was a recommendation on Adolf Eichmann's second in command,
Becher, Kurt Becher.
Kurt Becher, Obersturmführer Kurt Becher, who was actually the right hand of Eichmann in
In charge of the economy of all the...
in charge of everything.
That's right.
Of the transports, of
Right.
killing the Jews, everything.
Right.
Okay? He was put on trial in Nuremberg, and he was about to be sentenced to death, like his comrades. So, at the last moment, his lawyer got the letter handwritten on the letterhead of the Zionist movement in Hungary.
Oh, is that not the Sochnut?
Not the Sochnut, the Zionist movement in Hungary,
Really?
by the chairman of the Zionist movement in Hungary, Dr. Rudolf Kastner, saying that he helped to save Jews after the World War ended, and he was on trial in Nuremberg. That convinced me that Kastner was absolutely not innocent.
And I think that was one of the turning points in the trial.
Yes, that's
Well, you know,
There was a turning
well,
point.
I heard it differently slightly. I saw a reimbursement for expenses, I think, to Nuremberg, on a green paper, small green paper. Apparently, and I think this is what the Kastner family says, Michaeli and also Susie, that it was apparently sent by the Sochnut to testify for others. And the question is, and I think he was in Nuremberg, and the question is, why would we have sent Kastner to protect the Nazis? And I heard the following Nichushim, people are just hunting for answers. Maybe the Germans had weapons, and even after the war, these Nazis they made a deal that they turn over the weapons to us in Europe that are hidden, or money, that, the stolen money from Hungarian and other Jews.
But there was
I
also,
don't know.
there was also
These are
just to,
speculations beyond the scope of the trial.
Besides,
In this trial,
no, the fact that he was there, I don't think it's a speculation. Why he would have done it, I don't know. But I heard something else, that Israel did business with Kurt Becker's companies after the war. I forgot what kind of business. He became a very successful businessman.
Yeah.
And the question is why? How could we do business with a Nazi? Of course, we used some spies, some Nazis as spies in Egypt also. Politics is dirty.
I just want to mention, Ze'ev, your grandfather, you must be so proud that today, thank God, in Israel, he's an icon, he's a national hero. Broad spectrum, and there's, irrespective, people look at Jabotinsky, they go to Har Herzl. I live very close to Har Herzl. There were stamps issued, his name is, there's streets, I think in every single city, Jabotinsky. In Yerushalayim, it's one of the main streets. But it must give you a lot of satisfaction knowing that, thank God, your grandfather got the recognition which he deserved.
he deserved, yeah.
He very much deserved.
The truth, although Ben-Gurion tried to suppress it,
But the truth came out, yeah. And it's the will of the people. And there's the Jabotinsky streets, I think, in every city in Israel, in every town as well. And it must give you and your family a lot of
Look,
satisfaction.
I'm very proud to be his grandson. I did nothing to contribute to this fact.
Well,
You're actually also very proud to be your father's son.
I'm very proud to be my father's son, and I also didn't contribute to that fact.
but Ze'ev, I must just tell you, from Larry and myself, we really want to thank you for your incredible insight, your just being with you in your presence, relating to us the stories of your father and your grandfather. It's been such a privilege and an honor,
It
really.
really is a privilege.
And we just wish you all of Hashem's blessings. You must just have
Thank you.
Mazel Brocha at Mevestream. But really, thank you so much for a very
Thank you
special
very much for
interview.
the opportunity.
Thank you.
Did you ever speak to